Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast, heard right here on WABE. We are so glad that you're here today. Today, we'll probably talk about more polling. The polls are getting more serious as we are less than 100 days away from the general election. People are starting to look at the polls, not just strategists and folks like us. Joining me today are our strategists, Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Welcome to both of you. Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
And it has been quite a weekend, right? It's going to be pretty eventful leading up to the November general election, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but it was a really quiet weekend. After last weekend, we had a World Cup final, we had the British Open. This weekend, I was sort of searching for things to fill my time a little bit, so I took some naps.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It wasn't even a great weekend to go to the pool, was it? Because the clouds kept coming in and the rain and all of that. So you had to find something to do inside.
Yeah, and still too hot to walk your dog.
You know, one of the things that's interesting about now, Lisa, is that this is this weird time of year. You know, you're in July. We all are getting like World Cup, sort of fever. Like we used to be like, oh my God, it's gone. It's like we're going through this withdrawal. You're forcing yourself to like pay attention to football camp, you know, the NFL, college football is getting ready to ramp up. And it's really just baseball right now. But, you know, when we get into August, September, October, that's going to be where you have all the different sports that are being played. So those always like fun times for me during those months.
Yeah, for sure. Well, way back when, I remember, the polls started creeping out, and you guys you would say in unison, it's too soon to pay, close attention to the polling. Right now, it's too early. Things can change, and they do from day to day. But now the polls are coming out one after the other, and people are looking at them a little more seriously. The latest one, the AARP poll shows Jon Ossoff with a commanding lead over Mike Collins, and just kind of want to get your input. And we spent a lot of time talking about the gubernatorial race, but let's talk about this all-important Senate race today.
Well, I'll go first. I mean, listen, one thing that's been very consistent, Lisa, in all of the polling that I've seen, I think roughly there's been 3 or 4 polls that are out there, and it's been a few consistent themes. Number one, Jon Ossoff has a tremendous amount of name ID. With all voters across the state of Georgia, and that's a direct reflection, I think, of him serving in the U.S. Senate now for almost 6 years. The second thing that has been consistent in the polling is that he has a lead. While we don't pay attention a lot to the quote-unquote horse race number, and for our listeners, that's, when you compare the 2 candidates, in some cases 3 candidates, if you have like a libertarian in a race or independent, but you kind of don't pay attention to that number. You pay more attention to sort of the crosstabs and which demographics are actually leaning towards your candidate, which demographics you actually need to focus more on in geographical areas and ages and, race and things like that. But Jon Ossoff clearly has a very commanding lead when the 2 of these gentlemen, him and Mike Collins, are against each other. And the third and final thing is that not only is he leading, but he is actually leading amongst Democrats, of course. He's not doing terribly bad with people who identify themselves as Republicans. And is always a race for the middle and the undecideds and the moderates. And he's doing quite well with those folks. Now, I will say this, disclaimer. He's leading because, one, of all the things that I just mentioned, but also there has not been any robust money spent just yet amplifying his negatives. And so this race will tighten. He is on the attack on Mike Collins. We haven't heard from Mike Collins a lot. We haven't seen him, and he's been struggling a little bit with fundraising. So while, yes, we're focusing on these numbers right now because of where the race currently stands, but as it gets closer to September, I predict once a lot of money's been spent on Jon Ossoff and also Mike Collins, we get money spent on him, these numbers will tighten a little bit.
That's certainly the hope on the Republican side that these numbers will tighten, because I think the numbers need to tighten in order to keep the fundraising going for Mike Collins. And as Tharon mentioned correctly, Collins has lagged greatly behind Jon Ossoff. And where that is most glaring in its importance is Ossoff has about $40 million in his bank, and Collins has $2 million. So, I mean, you have a 20-1 differential, and that's not sustainable in a campaign. Now, there is money from Washington coming in for Collins. The Senate Leadership Fund has pledged over $40 million. But my concern as a Republican is that they may divert that money elsewhere unless we can prove to Republicans nationally that we have a shot here and that we can keep it within the margin of error or get it to the margin of error with Ossoff. So I do think that there's a bit of urgency beginning to build a little bit there in that Senate race. You cannot consistently see these 10-point margins. And look, to Tharon's point, once people begin to learn a little bit more about Ossoff and Republicans and independents maybe begin to learn a little bit more about Collins, maybe we'll revert to norms, right? We'll revert to where the regular partisan split is, and that will narrow this margin some organically. It just sort of happens over time. That's what Collins needs to begin happening because we got to make sure that national Republican donors see Georgia as competitive and they want to come in here and take on John Ossoff. Ossoff's going to have all the money in the world and all of the, not only in his own account, but Democrats nationally coming in to support him. They don't want to lose one of the two deep South seats that they have. And that's just Ossoff and Warnock at this juncture.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Image played a role in this poll as well. And the numbers show that a lot of people either have no opinion of Mike Collins or they haven't heard of him yet. Are you surprised at that notion?
No, I'm not surprised at all by that. John Ossoff has had a statewide presence for more than 6 years now, going back to the campaign in 2020 before he was a senator. So, of course, he's going to have a bigger footprint and more opportunities to promote his name ID than Mike Collins has. Mike Collins represents 1/14 of the state in population, and most of that is within the metro Atlanta media market, where there's a lot of politicians competing for the eyeballs and attention that voters divvy out very scarcely. So, of course, John Ossoff is going to have an advantage there. There's something that happens when you become the nominee of your party, though. You begin to develop that name ID, that presence, that brand, and people begin to know you. So I'm not shocked at all that his name ID is low, that people don't know much about him. That's perfectly normal. And that's really good news because it shows there's room for growth there for Mike Collins. And that is a huge takeaway. If there wasn't room for growth, if he was a known brand and he was down 10 points, this thing would be over. That $40 million I just talked about wouldn't be coming to Georgia because it would be a done deal for Ossoff. So Collins has room for growth. He's got to seize it.
Yeah, Tharon, is that good news, though? Is there true room for growth in wake of President Trump's approval ratings, which aren't very high right now?
No, I mean, you've heard me come on here now for weeks and remind B-Rob, yourself, and Lily, and everyone that listens that you have a very unpopular president right now. And I'm going to keep saying it until the data proves me wrong. I mean, he is not someone that I think Republicans are really that eager to be on the stage with. Now, clearly, we're not talking about Rick Jackson yesterday. We'll stay on U.S. Senate. But Mike Collins was not at the rally. Now, President Trump said, Lisa, he wasn't there because he had to make an important vote in Washington.
Y'all sounded really sarcastic. I mean, it was a really important vote. It was.
I'm taking the President of the United States of America at his word, B-Rob.
Yeah,
however, it's not sarcasm that you're hearing. It's actually a perfect segue to my next point. If these polls are reflective of him not being as known and a little bit undefined with these voters, why wouldn't you take the opportunity to be on the national stage when the person who leads your party is actually in the state that you're trying to unseat an incumbent U.S. senator? And so therein lies the challenge. Now, I believe, to be fair here, is that I believe that Mike Collins know that Republican voters know his association with Donald Trump. So there's really no need to increase his visibility and loyalty to that president. But also, Lisa, this poll showed that while John Ossoff is doing very well with younger voters, but this is the AARP poll, so they are very focused on their seasoned membership, where Mike Collins does have a glimmer of hope, and it's a glimmer of hope, is that he is doing a little bit better when it comes to the older seasoned voters that are asked a question in this poll. And so I just think, Lisa, Brian is right. He's not served statewide. He represents a congressional district. His race for a long time in the primary wasn't really getting a lot of national attention because it wasn't until really Derek Dooley entered the race during the primary where the U.S. Senate race on the Republican side got really in the headlines, and then it was also because of Brian Kemp's role with Derek Dooley. So he does have some name recognition room to grow, but he is going to get so much money from the Republicans, and I think he's going to go on the offense. By the time we get to October, both of these individuals will have the name recognition, but at the end of the day, it's all about building a winning coalition. I think that this poll reflects that he's got a lot of work to do with trying to put together a winning coalition.
Yeah, and Brian, chime in about the Trump factor, though. That's going to become critical, especially if his approval ratings, remain where they are. Is the coalition here in Georgia doing anything in particular to combat that?
Let me quickly say Mike Collins had to go vote on the National Defense Authorization Act, which is hugely important, and there are only 218 Republicans in the House. Let's recall there are 435 members overall, so 218 is the bare minimum for a majority. So you get below that, and you no longer have a majority in the House. So it is perfectly rational that he had to be there on the floor of the House to vote on Wednesday. And look, Mike Collins is not one who would shy away from the Trump brand. It is his brand. He has adopted it as his own. So there's no changing it now. There's no hurting Mike Collins by being seen on stage with Donald Trump. It is already baked into the pie. And I think that's true for all the Republicans up and down the ballot. The Trump brand is already something they own for good or for ill, whatever the political winds may be. So what do Georgia Republicans do? Well, I just said the word. They run as Georgia Republicans. One thing I say here a lot is while Georgians may think the country is going in the wrong direction under Democrat and Republican administrations, they generally think that Georgia is going in the right direction. And one of the beneficiaries of that is Georgia Republicans because they control all the levers of power here in the state. And people feel like the state is well run. So that is something that Georgia Republicans have to build on. They have to show that what we do here, and we have to educate to some degree that the Georgia Republican policies that are benefiting you here at home are done by Georgia Republicans at the state level. And it's different from what's happening in Washington. You can think Washington is broken, but see the Georgia government as one that functions well and is delivering for constituents. So I think that's a really important brand here. And at the end of the day, Trump's approval ratings do matter. I travel around with Tharon a lot, and one thing he hears me say about 1 million times, all politics is now national. So if you run for coroner, you have to start your campaign by saying whether you want to declare Trump dead or declare him alive, right? So it is the baseline of American politics. So it does matter. But that Trump brand is so big that Republicans already have it. They already have it baked in. And look, this is something that Democrats had to deal with in 2022. You had Raphael Warnock on the ballot running for re-election. Biden's numbers had already gone down by then. People were already beginning to see the effects of inflation. We were much closer then to the Afghanistan debacle under Biden's leadership. And what did Raphael Warnock do? He was like, look, I'm focused on Georgia. I'm my own man. I'm not Joe Biden's surrogate. So both sides have to do this when there's unhappiness with the White House.
So real quick, Lisa, I would like to respond to 2 points that B-Rob made. Let's go to the Warnock comparison here. And he's now done that 2 weeks in a row. And, and being with him so long, you have to take time out of your weekend to really, dissect and study and say, okay, what is B-Rob really trying to accomplish here? So let me push back on behalf of my Democratic listeners there and make the contrast between Senator Raphael Warnock and Congressman Mike Collins. Yes, did Senator Warnock run as a first-time candidate, a more independent, I'm not a traditional kind of politician campaign where he really focused on Georgia issues. He didn't give rural voters a reason to be scared of him as a boogeyman. Did he put Christmas lights on and walk a dog? Absolutely, he did that. But there was really no prior consistent connection to Joe Biden in an elected capacity. Now, let's talk about Mike Collins' relationship with Donald Trump. Totally different. Since this man has run for office, he has labeled himself as a MAGA workhorse, a MAGA warhorse, a MAGA warrior. I mean, all the W's you can mention. He has gone to the well. He's gone to the microphone. He's given money. He's spoken up against critics of Donald Trump. He's spoken for Donald Trump. Like, he is so embedded with Trump. Like, Trump is all of his brand. big difference than where Warnock was when he was running for office. So Warnock had the ability, Lisa, to pivot and say, hey, I want to run my own campaign. He didn't run away from Joe Biden because they was like all of a sudden, okay, I've been loyal to this man for so many decades and now I want to pivot. But he did read the tea leaves and say, hey, I need to be more of a Georgia Democratic centric sort of candidate. Mike Collins is not going to be able to do that with Donald Trump because, as Brian wants you to believe that these Republicans all of a sudden can go back to being Georgia Republicans, it's going to be very hard for Mike Collins to do that. Now, Rick Jackson, who again I know we'll talk about in a later week, he can try to do that because the campaign now is trying to figure out, okay, is he an outsider or is he an insider? Like, is he with Trump or is he not with Trump? And then the second thing I want to kind of push back on is I think that, yes, B-Rob, a year ago, you could make that argument that Georgia voters are very happy in the direction that the state is heading. But you're reviewing polling like I'm reviewing polling. I think that number is trickling down a little bit, partly because you have an outgoing governor, right? And so now people are looking for, okay, what's next? Like, okay, who's going to make my life better? And you've also had a lot of money being spent on both sides telling folks what's wrong with Georgia and what can be better and what can we do to fix some of the problems. And so when you have that much money spent on highlighting problems and opportunities to grow Georgia, make Georgia a better place to live, I think voters now started to say, okay, you know what? I do need to really think about Medicaid expansion. This redetermination program in the foster care system, this redetermination program with Medicaid and getting people to sign up for ACA subsidies when now you have over 500,000 people off the voting rolls, that is a bad thing. Can we improve our foster care system? Yes, we're the number one place to do business, but we're also the worst place for women of color to have a baby. That's what voters are now starting to think a lot more about, Lisa, because money is being put behind these messagings. And so, yeah, we are a good state, but we're not as good as we once was. And I think by the time we get to October, voters are going to start to question, are there things that we can do better? And then who is the right man or woman, in this case, to actually lead us into the next phase of developing this state?
I want to say there that Tharon is right, and I hate that he's right. I hate it. And I have not discussed this with him. But their side sees polling, my side sees polling, and sometimes I'm seeing stuff that Theron's seeing, but I can't say that I'm seeing it because I don't want to give him information and vice versa. But yes, there is a lessening of the positive environment amongst those being polled right now. And that's probably, I think you'll see sometime in the future, whenever there's a statewide poll that does approval ratings on statewide officials, you'll see Kemp, who's had really high approval ratings throughout much of his second term, sometimes into the 60s. You're going to see that number coming down. Now, that doesn't mean that his performance has changed. It doesn't mean that he is, tuned out and doesn't care anymore. What it means is people are using the approval for the governor as a proxy for how they're feeling. So if they feel like their personal economy isn't doing as well, they're going to give Kemp a lower approval rating. So it's more about saying, I don't like where I am, and I'm going to say I disapprove of Kemp's approval rating as a result. So I am seeing that as well, and that's something that does need to stabilize for Republicans to remain competitive in this election. And this is going to be a tight one, baby. This is going to be a tight one. I don't think that there's any doubt. If people ask me, about the Republicans feeling confident going in or the Democrats feeling confident going in, I can tell you this, and I do think Tharon would agree with me. Both sides have a chance to lose it, and we'll see who can step forward and go and grab the gold ring and win it. Because I think that's what it's going to take here. Like, you've got to go and win it because it's going to be super tight, and it's on the statewide level. I think that there's a really strong case to be made against Keisha Lance Bottoms in this governor's race. Rick Jackson's obviously going to have a lot of resources. We just saw news today that he's put down an $80+ million media buy going into the fall. So we know that there will be a message out there. We will see what the Democrats are able to do to match it. But I'm here to tell you, even if they don't come close to matching it, it's still going to be competitive because this is Georgia.
Well, real quick, Lisa, let me also say this on behalf of Keisha Lance Bottoms and John Ossoff that they are already spending money getting the Democratic message out about why Rick Jackson is not the right choice for Georgia and that we don't need an extremist, MAGA extremist like Mike Collins in Washington, D.C. as the U.S. Senate. And I want to say this for our listeners, and this is what the Democrats, we should feel emboldened and we should feel empowered. We're up on television right now. Now, Rick Jackson, B. Rob is right. A lot of people got that message this morning, Lisa. And I'm gonna tell you now, it hits when you see, when I got it, I thought it was 87,000, or maybe it was just 8 million. No, it's $87 million that this man has reserved on television.
That's serious money.
My,
And
my,
that is
my.
serious money.
Oh my
Not,
goodness!
I mean, listen,
Boy,
I thought it was a
is it.
typo. I thought it was a typo. I was like, okay, maybe
Yeah.
8 million. No, and so, but where
87 million. Wow.
but where I feel encouraged is that John Ossoff right now is up with his second ad. Very two effective ads, one about foster care, another one about Mike Collins and him attached to the Epstein files, doubling down on the negative messages of his ethics challenges and anti-Semitic comments, and things like that. Keisha Lance Bottoms is up with a very positive statewide buy ad talking about expanded Medicaid, rural hospitals closing, people having to drive too far for healthcare access. And so Democrats are up right now with positive messages, strengthening the base. She's also kicking off a rural tour this week where she's going to go across Southeast Georgia, talking about, important issues to rural voters and also healthcare. So it's a little preemptive for this $87 million buy, but Rick Jackson is also going to have to defend some of the things that he's associated with, but he's also going to have to make the case of why he is the best. But I think right now, Keisha Lance Bottoms is doing a really good job, and John Ossoff is saying why they are the best sort of duo to lead the state forward.
And let me say there real quick here that we know that Senate Leadership Fund, which is a Republican spending arm for the Republicans, has devoted $44 million, whatever, to Georgia to support Mike Collins. I think that they need to show some good faith here as Collins is trying to fundraise to get a message out. Let him focus on fundraising, but we need to go and fill the vacuum right now. I would love to see some of that D.C. money come in and start going toe-to-toe with Ossoff so that he's not speaking to Georgians in a vacuum where he's the only voice out there in the Senate race. My concern is we can't have the numbers cement. Now, people would have said some time ago that spending this early is just good money after bad. It's not going to make a difference. People don't tune in until September, October. And this is just all bad burn, bad burning of money. I disagree in this environment. We cannot let Ossoff solidify a 50+% in polling. There's got to be fire put under Ossoff to keep him from growing and to continue to maintain that room for growth for Mike Collins.
All right. Well, let's take a break here. And when we come back, let's talk about the governor's race in particular. We talked about money and ads, how they play a key role. Emotions are starting to play a role on the campaign trail. We'll talk about it in a moment. All right, welcome back to Political Breakfast. Of course, we're talking about polling and the Senate campaign as well as the gubernatorial campaign. I want to make reference to an article I read in the AJC written by Patricia Murphy, and she was talking about Rick Jackson and how he gets emotional on the campaign trail and how that may probably play in his favor when it comes to November polls. And I just want to get your thoughts on that. First, you, Tharon. I don't know. I see you smiling there.
Well,
what's
Lisa,
that smile about? What's that
yeah,
smile about?
no. Here we go. This is one that I am smiling because this is interesting. Here we are again, where you have a white male going against a black woman for governor of Georgia. Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp went at it twice. Brian Kemp never, ever was sort of depicted as a and this is a Patricia words, B. Rob, not mine, as a crier. Okay, that's what she called him, right? Rick Jackson is labeled as a crier, and so Stacey Abrams, like Keisha Lance Bottoms, you're a black woman, Lisa. You cannot be labeled as a crier. As a woman, I'm speaking to all my women listeners out there. I'm for you, sisters. is that you have to prove that you are not going to be emotional. No matter job, whether you run for governor or you want to be an administrative assistant, you want to be an entrepreneur, or you want to be a corporate CEO. You cannot be in any position in this world where we have a president and others where women have to be so much better. They have to be so careful about not being labeled as an emotional person in leadership. And yes, in some instances, when I think about social workers and I think about teachers, I want my teachers and my, social workers and people who are helping others to have a sense of humanization and emotions, right? And so what's interesting about what Patricia Murphy article is doing is that it's like, okay, it's a transformation from this Rick Jackson that we saw come out the gates and say, oh, I don't need anybody's money. I'm my own man. I'm going to destroy the Republican establishment, which, by the way, he's benefited from. And I'm gonna get rid of Burt Jones and all the lobbyists and all the inside player guys because I'm. And then he comes out and says I'm gonna be just like Trump with a Southern tone, and I want to be the best governor Trump could be a part of. And he spent hundreds of millions of dollars in a very aggressive way telling you how bad Burt Jones was and how bad Raffensperger. He didn't really go at Carr as much. And it was a very, very strong attack. And many Republicans sort of warned Rick Jackson's campaign to say, hey, you need to soften up a little bit at the end. Like, you need to stop going so hard because people are really kind of thinking like, okay, this is just too strong. And this is also the man, Lisa, who said that you'll either be deported or departed. Now let's go to the general election, Rick Jackson. So what Patricia Murphy's article is doing is that he got emotional on the stage, and we didn't really see him be as emotional as he was in Trump rallies because I'm a Democrat. I don't go to a lot of Rick Jackson events. And so apparently I think what Patricia is trying to say is that there have been other instances where he's shown this emotion. I just think that this crier, again, her words, not mine, B-Rob, sort of depiction of Rick Jackson is a very shrewd and intelligent way of the campaign trying to say, hey, this guy does have feelings, even though he's a billionaire. But he can relate to you, and he's very passionate about this work that he's done in the foster care system, and he's going to give you $1,000, and if he doesn't go through. So I think that this is all about a transformational moment for the campaign to bring a level of humanization to Rick Jackson. Therefore, Keisha Lance Bottoms, if she was ever labeled as a crier, Lisa, oh my God, this race will be over. Like there would be no way. And I
Patricia's
love
saying the tears may help him win, though.
No.
The tears may help him win. So that
no. Listen, but I want to get here the way that it's a standard that women can't have the luxury of saying. Nowhere do you see in politics that a reporter can say that the woman crying can actually help her lead the state. What she's saying about Rick Jackson is because he has been labeled as this very successful, powerful businessman who spent hundreds of millions of dollars going. I mean, think about it, Lisa. He destroyed Burt Jones. Burt Jones was supposed to walk into the governor's mansion, and out of nowhere, here comes Rick Jackson, and you saw the ads, right? And so it's now he's crying because I think that Patricia Murphy is onto something that he's trying to be more relatable. Now, I'm not saying that Rick Jackson doesn't care. Let me say that. I'm not saying Rick Jackson doesn't care. I'm not saying he's not passionate, but.
Brian's slowly sinking over there into his blanket in his chair.
I know, but what I'm saying to you is that I realize the transformation that's happening, and that Brian can maybe speak to his best ability where it is on the campaign. But yes, him showing that I am relatable, I do care, is a part that candidates go through. But I just want to make sure I point out that Keisha Lance Bottoms, I hope Patricia Murphy will come back and write an article that's very similar about not emotion, but her leadership, and about her ability to basically thrive in a world, in a political environment where it's pretty much dominated by men. I think that I just really hope that she'll come back and write a very similar article that humanizes Keisha Lance Bottoms the same way that she's humanizing Rick Jackson.
All right, Brian, let's get you in here.
Well, as always, I am an advisor to the Jackson campaign. And so let me first start off. Part of what Tharon was saying there made it sound like it's a strategy, that it's a scheme on the part of the Jackson campaign to make him relatable, to make him look like a normal person. And I can tell you, there's never a meeting where we're like, okay, Rick, no, this is the line where we need you to like kind of tear up a little bit and get emotional. It'll be very powerful, right? Let me assure everyone out there in political breakfast world that is not happening. I was with him on the road during the primary. I'm less so during the general as the team has expanded. So I sat through his stump speech about 200 times. And so I've seen this happen. And I will tell you, the trigger is always the same. It's when he's talking about something in his childhood that is, it triggers a memory, which triggers then a very deep feeling. I do not see him cheer up when talking about anything that doesn't have to do with his childhood or today's children who are in vulnerable situations. He does get emotional about those. And yes, I would imagine that does send a message to Georgia voters that this is somebody with a big heart and who cares and is genuine. What I want to say very clearly is it's not in any way cynical. It is something that is him to the core. I'm also, staff, right? So I'm the help. And so I see business Rick Jackson too. And let me tell you, there ain't no tears of business Rick Jackson. He demands excellence. He has a vision for how he wants things to go. And he can be a man of steel when he's in that mode. And I see that too. And let me tell you, as staff, sometimes it's not what you want to see, but boy, he keeps you in line and he keeps the engines humming. So there are two different sides, and I see both of them, and both of them are genuine, and both of them are very true to him. So I actually spoke with Patricia about this column as I was walking my dog, Asher, on Saturday morning in the blistering heat. Poor guy. He's a golden retriever, and it's just way too hot any time of day for him to walk. So I was spending some time talking to Patricia, and she reminded me that back in the primary, she had seen him speak in Winder at a Golden Corral, and some of his foster siblings had shown up to see him unannounced, and he got emotional when seeing them. And that's the kind of thing that does trigger that emotion. And so she's seen that on several occasions, but again, always within those buckets that I was talking about, his childhood or children of today who are in need.
Yeah, and it's nothing new. There have been other candidates, who get emotional on the campaign trail. But I thought it was interesting that she suggested that this could possibly
let me tell you.
Lead to a win in November. And
I think it
he's
does
tearing up.
Yes. And look, I'm an old Nathan Deal guy too. I mean, in the second term, for him, the trigger was criminal justice reform. When he would talk about these folks who have been to prison for drugs or mental health, and then they get a fresh start and they get a job, then they get their first car, maybe they get married and have children. When he tells those stories, he is blubbering by the end of the sentence. I mean, it just strikes this chord, and it is a powerful connection to the audience. And it's not cynical, it's genuine, it's authentic. I think both of these guys, if they had their druthers, would not show that emotion, but it just goes to show you how deep it is.
Well, Lisa, one thing I'm going to do on the show, I'm always going to side with women. And I'm always going to make sure that the women listeners, because who are part of my base, understand that I think that many of them will believe that if the same article was written about any woman candidate, right, running for higher office, I think that it would be phrased a different way. So no attack on Patricia Murphy. I mean, she's a great friend and a journalist. But I do want to point out that if we're talking about the context of her article, yes, she put something out here that clearly is a man who we haven't seen that emotion, and I trust what B. Rob is saying. Never did I say it was a scheme or it was concocted, but he read between the lines of what he wanted to interpret. But I think the bigger thing here is making sure that we understand that if she's saying that it's going to help him win, then I think that voters need to be aware that, as B. Rob just talked about, there are two Rick Jacksons. And don't just be focused on the one that Patricia Murphy told you about. Right. Also make sure you focus on the other one too. All
right, guys, thank you so much. We gotta go, getting kicked out the room here. So
That's okay.
Thank you so much for your insight, and we'll do it again next week.
Great.
Thanks,
guys.
All right.